welcome to another episode of Ancient Tools for Modern Living. I'm your host, Sipora Gerson-Miller. I am a licensed psychotherapist and certified yoga therapist, among other things. I'm also just a human being who tries to live life on life's terms, which many of you know is not easy at all. So for those of you who are new around here, Ancient Tools for Modern Living is a podcast dedicated to promoting and supporting mental health in all stages, from awareness to recovery, through practical yoga and holistic lifestyle. We do that through thoroughly exploring the intersection between mental health, practical yogic lifestyle tips, and other psychological concepts and ideas rooted in Eastern traditions. So if you are someone who struggles with mild to severe mental health challenges, helps someone, loves someone, knows someone, works with someone, or are just simply interested in learning more about this kind of inquiry, you are in the right place. But keep in mind, what works for someone might not work for someone else. Therefore, there is no right or wrong way to do recovery. This is also not in any way a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider or a doctor. So one of my main intentions in doing this work is to provide content and research on how yoga and wisdom grounded in other Eastern and contemplative traditions can support someone who lives with mental health challenges, and some of the ways in which we can integrate other holistic tools, because recovery is and really should be a holistic and integrative path to change. And we're so very fortunate nowadays because there's so much research out there that supports the efficacy of holistic treatments, and people, thankfully, are becoming more and more vocal about it. So with that said, one of my new goals with the podcast is to try to incorporate as much research and as many articles that I come across that I find might be relevant or helpful to you guys. So the reason I'm trying to do this more regularly is because, as a person who works in the field of mental health care, it's common practice to provide what we call, and I'm doing air quotes, evidence-based treatment when working with clients. And basically what evidence-based means is that the intervention that one is using has been researched using reliable research methods and found to have demonstrated some sort of efficacy or effectiveness in improving or decreasing symptoms. So you can find me on the web at innerskytherapeutics.com, where this podcast lives, as well as a blog and other resources related to yoga and mental health. You can also find me on Facebook, both at Inner Sky Therapeutics and Ancient Tools for Modern Living. So the podcast also has its own Facebook page. And I'm also on Instagram as #InnerSkyTherapeutics and #Ancient Tools for Modern Living. And as this podcast begins to develop and grow, I will be sharing with you any and all new projects that I may become involved in. And as always, all of these links will be available in the show notes. So with that said, today I will be talking to one of my mentors, Tra Kirkpatrick. Tra is a certified life coach, certified yoga therapist, and experienced yoga teacher, and one of the co-founders of the Center for Integrative Yoga Studies in Atlanta, Georgia. At the time Tra found her way to yoga, she described herself as unhappy, unhealthy, and unsettled, and divinely discontent. She said that she was deeply touched by the practice and let go of a 15-year career to pursue yoga teacher training at the Kripalu school in the Kripalu tradition with Yoganand Michael Carroll. As a yoga therapist, she uses the tools and techniques of the Tantra Hatha yoga tradition to restore balance, increase vitality, and improve mental well-being. In 2014, Tra co-founded the Center for Integrative Yoga Studies, which I am proudly a graduate of, that offers both a 200 and 300-hour teacher training focused on a therapeutic and meditative approach. Tra lives in Atlanta and offers regular weekly classes, workshops, and Thai yoga therapy sessions. So today in my interview, Tra and I are going to be discussing the intersection of yogic philosophy and principles with behavior change. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you, so I hope you enjoy the episode. Hi, Trey. Welcome,
Hi, Deborah.
welcome to the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to share this space with you today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about yoga and behavior change. I think it's a really important thing to reflect on and dive a little deeper into. So I think it's something that really needs to be heard and shared in our field. So before we dive deeper into the topic of yoga and behavior change, I was wondering if you could briefly tell our listeners about your own yoga journey and how you came to yoga in the first place, and maybe some things you've noticed that have transformed in your own life.
I ran into yoga quite by accident, quite truthfully. I was out to lunch with my partner and a friend one afternoon many, many years ago. And I saw a flyer for an open house at a yoga studio that was right near the restaurant. And I didn't really know anything about the yoga. This was the mid to late 90s. And there weren't very many yoga studios in Atlanta at that time. I think maybe 3, including the outer areas of Atlanta, not just in the city of Atlanta. And at any rate, I kind of bailed on the lunch and went and checked out this thing called yoga. And it immediately resonated with me. I couldn't really articulate what my experience was, but that there was something that just spoke to me in this class that I went to at this open house. And given my largely addictive nature, I jumped right into yoga. And before I knew it, was going to sometimes 2 classes a day, 6 or 7 times a week. Just really fell in love with the practice and had some wonderful teachers that helped open the door to the teachings for me.
So I always am really interested in hearing people's, stories of how they came to yoga. And I think that it's so interesting because there's this parallel between like addiction, and every addict remembers like the first time that they tried the drug,
Right.
and
Yeah,
remembers that first
absolutely.
experience. And, it's
Yep.
the same with yoga. I think everybody, when you're sort of, in that space and really touched, it's really hard to forget about that first time, that got you on the path. So I know, you had written an article in the International Journal of Yoga Therapy a while back, and the title of your piece was Patanjali's Sutras, and how it works with behavior change and transformation. So for those of our listeners that aren't as familiar with the sutras necessarily, could you just give like a brief overview into what the sutras are and why they're important, and maybe some ways that they can be applied to modern day living through a yogic lens?
Yeah. So in short, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is a document or a book that was written actually not that long ago, a couple hundred years after the turn of the century. And so around 200 Common Era. The sutras basically outline a path of this process that we call yoga, right? And so the sutra says that the system is both a path and, for lack of a better word, a goal. So if I follow this 8-limbed or 8-legged process that's outlined in the Yoga Sutras, then by doing so, I will be both practicing yoga and attaining the quote unquote state of yoga, which ideally is equanimity or peace. And so, most of us are familiar with the first 3 limbs of yoga, especially in the West, which is the idea of asana or yoga postures, pranayama or breath work, and then meditation, which is actually a couple limbs up, but we use different ways of meditating in our country, whether guided meditation, visualization, imagery, but ways to really focus our attention and our awareness to create a more expanded state of mind.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That's because I know we could go. I mean, there's so much to cover when it comes to yogic texts, and
Yes.
that will be a discussion for another day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
one thing that I wanted to unpack really quick, and I know you mentioned it in your article, but I encounter this assumption a lot in my own work, is that there is this belief that yoga is inherently therapeutic. I'll have a lot of people say, well, you do yoga, so, why are you still stressed out? Isn't yoga just therapeutic? Or, why do you, have high blood pressure? You do yoga, so
Right.
how is yoga not inherently therapeutic? And what would differentiate a yoga studio class from something that is intended to be a yoga therapy session?
Yeah, and that's a multi-layered question. So I'll try to answer in as many layers as I can. Yoga therapy, really as defined by the International Association of Yoga Therapists, which is the kind of the governing standard board of yoga therapy, says that yoga therapy is about empowering people to create a greater state of well-being or quality of life. And what's not said in that statement is that our quality of life is not determined by the circumstances of our lives necessarily. And so, for instance, I can be a person that has a pathology or condition that brings me chronic pain. And I can go to a general population yoga class, and I can be led through a beautiful experience that creates more mobility in my joints, that might allow me to relax a little bit. And then after an hour or 75 minutes or 90 minutes, I pack up my mat, I go out the door, and I go on my merry way. And, maybe make it back to the class the next week, 2 days from now, whatever. With yoga therapy, what we're really doing is we're working with the multi-dimensional aspect of a person's experiences and the layers of their experiences. So that if I'm that same person with chronic pain, when I'm working with yoga therapy, I am working with very specific breath techniques to bring my nervous system into a parasympathetic nervous system dominant state, right? So I'm moving from that activation and fight or flight or flee response into a more rested, well-regulated response. I am working with yoga postures and movement to find spaces within my body where I have no pain or less pain. And I learned through the lens of yoga, how do I relate to my pain experiences, and how do I perceive pain, and how do I perceive sensation? And so then in a therapeutic model, I'm working with a more well-rounded or a multi-layered experience of what it means to be in this body with these experiences, and learning how I relate to those experiences, so that in effect, I can take that information out of my practice when I roll up my mat and out into my day-to-day experiences, so that I can more fully understand, what am I making my pain mean in this moment, and how might I maybe or maybe not change my perception or relationship to it at any given time.
So, yeah, it sounds like, in an individual yoga therapy session, it's, very much tailored to that specific, unique person's, constitution and the different layers of that person, versus a yoga class, which is just going to be very general, and the class and the sequence may not be tailored to that person, specifically.
Yeah. That is certainly one aspect of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I think that, that's a wonderful segue to get into the, the discussion about, yoga as a model for behavior change. So I'm really curious how you sort of, got into that specific niche, within the field of yoga therapy, specifically with behavior change. And then, if you could sort of unpack for us, like how the stages of change model aligns so well with the yoga therapy model. And
Yeah. So my entryway into studying more specifically in this area of behavior change in yoga came in two ways. One was through my personal experiences in life, and the other was just through things that developed for me over the course of time professionally. And so from a personal perspective, just in brief, I dealt with a lifetime of obesity and self-abuse through food or lack of food or withholding of food. And I also struggled for many years with drug addiction. Through both of those experiences of behavior and self-harming behavior, I went through different paths or directives to try to create a safer, greater environment for my body, right? Eating better, exercising, not doing drugs, right? Like all of those things. And I'm really simplifying it for the sake of this interview. Some of the details can be read in that article that you mentioned. And then I had another in Elephant Journal a couple years before that. But at any rate, so part of my interest in this arena came from my personal experiences with addiction and moving in and out of addiction of different kinds for many years. And then the other was that at one point in my professional life, back in the early 2000s, I went through about a year-long program to become a certified life coach. Excuse me. And in that process of learning the tools and the resources for coaching, being coached for a year and coaching others for many, many years, I became very interested in this dynamic of human behavior, and more specifically, why oftentimes what we want does not align with what we're doing, right? So there's this misalignment between inner desire or passion and like my day-to-day actions. And as I worked with people more and my own self more and looked at this misalignment, I found that over time, my yoga practice really filled that gap. It became the bridge between what was that space of my true self that we think of as yoga, right? My innermost desires, my dreams, the very vital, thriving life that I wanted to live, health and body, mind and spirit, and the stuff that I was actually doing in my day-to-day life, which were very disproportionate. Excuse me. And the more and more that I practiced yoga and the deeper that I got into the philosophical teachings, I began to see this pathway that helped me bridge these two aspects of my experiences, the inner desire and the outer world, so to speak. With behavior change, I studied behavior change through coaching and all the various obstacles that we put in the way of changing and understanding energy and catabolic energy and anabolic energy and what drives us and what pulls us and what helps us sink. And, what I found is that there was also this really great correlation between the yoga that I practice and teach and relate my life to, which is Tantra Hatha yoga, and what I had learned through my coaching experience. So when we began to look more fully at the yoga practice and how behavior manifests or we create behavior, I began to see that they were the same, right? Yeah, this is a big mouthful. So let me pause here for just a second, if I might, and talk a little bit more about the behavior side, if that's okay, so that I can hopefully pull all this together. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think that would be great, because I would love for you to talk about the behavior side, and then maybe also kind of back up and just give just some, explanation on Tantra Hatha yoga, like what differentiates Tantra, what Tantra really
Yeah.
is, because we get a lot of misconceptions about that as
Hmm.
well, and misappropriated assumptions as well.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yes, behavior, and then let's cover
Yeah.
Tantra quickly
Yes.
after
Okay.
that.
Got it.
Yeah.
So we know that people have been seeking and using traditional therapies for many, many years, and there's been a lot of success in traditional therapies. And I'm going to talk more specifically about behavior therapy, because that's really what we're talking about is change in behavior. And so, just as generally speaking, as a broad overset, is that behavior therapy, there are different kinds of behavior therapy. There's cognitive behavior therapy, which is understanding how your thoughts and your beliefs create your actions and your moods. There's like the system desensitization. I trip over that word every time.
Yeah,
It
it's
is
a
a
mouthful.
mouthful. Therapy, which is more along the lines, or comes from like the classical conditioning, and it starts usually with relaxation and breath techniques. It's used a lot for people with different phobias, and then the good old aversion therapy, which is actually used largely in sectors of addiction, kind of creating that relationship between an unpleasant stimulus and an unpleasant response, right? So I'm going to think of something really unpleasant every time I think of drinking alcohol, if I'm an alcoholic. And so those are some different kinds of behavior therapy, and they work relatively well in areas for eating disorders, bipolar disorder, ADHD, phobias, OCD, substance abuse, self-harm. So they are very effective. But here's also what has been found in more cross cultural studies of behavior. And that is that the behavior therapy, while it provides some really wonderful tools and resources for people, it also does not individualize the process of change, right? So I kind of have this one exercise, so to speak, that's used for all people, and that really doesn't account for people's largely distinctive and unique personalities and natures and energies. And so sometimes those therapies get diluted in their effectiveness, or they don't translate into lifelong change. And we, there was that TV show that was on for a long time. It might still be on, The Biggest Loser program, right? Where people go and live in a house and have personal trainers and people that teach them how to cook, and they exercise 8 hours a day and they lose hundreds of pounds, and that's all wonderful. However, what we also see is that sometimes people in those situations go back into their day-to-day lives. The tools and the resources that they had slowly dissolve away, and their old behavior changes or returns, or old behavior returns. And so what we see from those kinds of experiences in people is that the cognitive or behavior therapies, and just changing, right, just making a choice and okay, I'm not going to do this now, I'm going to do that, doesn't always shift the energy dynamic and the relationship and perspective dynamic that needs to take place for lifelong change to occur. And so there was a cross-cultural study done for many, many years that looked at different schools of psychology, the various common components to those principles and processes. And these particular people that did this research study wrote a book, and this book outlines what they were able to delineate as 6 different stages of change. And what's really cool is that in their study, they also looked very closely at what they call self-changers. So those are people that make huge changes in their lives in some way without going to an external person, professional, group, or what have you. So, for example, for my experience, I had an issue with cocaine addiction for many years, and I would be one of those people that they would qualify as a self-changer. I did not go to AA. I did not go to NA. I did not even actually go to any kind of behavior therapy. I was able to cultivate that change within myself. And so what they discovered was that there are 6 stages of change that were very clear in both self-changers and people who got change through support from a person or a group. And those stages were very predictable in each and every person. And so when you look at those stages, and we can talk more fully about them if you want, but when you look at those stages, there is an alignment between each of the stages and where we can apply the various tools of our yoga practice so that we're not just doing things externally. We're really making changes from the core of our being and letting that ruminate out into the peripheral edges of our lives.
Yeah, so people that are, listening who are, licensed mental health and behavioral health clinicians will, many of us learn, motivational interviewing in our graduate programs. And so we're very familiar with stages of change, and we, get how hard it is and how people are in different stages of change. And that will determine how ready a person is to make change and how well they can maintain it. So what are the components of yoga that align with those 6 stages of change? So for those that may not know that.
Yeah. So I'll start this answer at first by talking about the Tantra Hatha yoga aspect.
Let's get yes,
because that is distinctive, I think, at least in my line of work. I'm sure there's other lineages and other practices that also have their own distinctions, but I can only speak from my experience. So I certainly don't mean to diminish or dilute any other teaching. Yeah. So like the first stage that they identify, so let me back up. So with Tantra Hatha Yoga, we're looking at the body and the breath as a representation of the energy. And through the practices that we do, so through when I'm doing yoga postures, when I'm doing any kind of breath work, I am using those simply as an entryway to understand the energy that lies beneath those experiences. So what Tantra Hatha Yoga says is every physical sensation that I feel, every thought, every emotion is simply an energetic experience. And what happens is that my ego part of me has that energetic experience. It takes that experience, and because the ego binds itself to itself through language, right? It uses language to create meaning around those energies that I feel. So in a very simple way of thinking about it, let's say I am in the yoga posture of Crescent Warrior or Virabhadrasana Warrior 1, right? It's got many different names. And I hold that posture. And for the first few breaths, it feels great. I feel strong. I feel powerful. And all is good in my world because that strength and that power solidifies my ego self, right? And then all of a sudden the energy starts to change because I'm holding the posture longer and longer and longer, and my muscles are starting to fatigue, and my arms are getting tired, and my leg is starting to quiver, and my breath is starting to shorten, right? And all of those things are causing physical sensations, and my nervous system is now responding to those physical sensations. And my ego looks at all of that and goes, oh shit, right? It's not, what am I doing? What is happening to me? This is not who I am. This is threatening my identity. And what Tantra Hatha Yoga does is it says, oh, wait a minute. Wait, Step back one more, go to the observing mind, watch the energy. This is just a whole bunch of heat moving around inside of you. It's fine. You're fine. You're not going to die here. Let the ego be threatened so that it can grow beyond its little small mind, right? And so we use Tantra Hatha Yoga as a way to explore our relationship to the energy and how we create meaning out of those energetic experiences, right? So that's a very simple way of thinking about Tantra Hatha Yoga. And so when I take that and I layer it with this idea of stages of change, right? The first stage that they identify is what they call pre-contemplation. In pre-contemplation, I'm not looking for a solution to my problem because I don't even know that I have a problem, right? And a lot of times what will happen is something external to myself will have to push me out of that pre-contemplation stage into the next stage, which is known as contemplation. And so sometimes it can be something really simple, like a big birthday, I turned 50 and or 60, and I have that quote unquote midlife crisis, or the birth of a child, or the death of a partner or a spouse, right? There can be some external event that kind of pushes me from thinking about something to actually thinking about doing something, right? Or not thinking about something. And I think we've all had those kinds of experiences in our lives, right? Those are what we call defining or pivotal moments. And so in that stage of pre-contemplation, I can use my yoga practice to begin to grow that space of awareness, right? I can use my breath work, my postures, my movement, what I feel, my nervous system, to begin to understand, like, where am I in relationship to myself? And can I begin to delineate that voice, which is the ego mind? Because the ego mind is what's going to become my biggest obstruction to change, right? Because the ego wants to maintain the status quo. And as soon as I begin to want to change something, the ego becomes threatened. And so the first thing that I want to do is to be able to use my yoga practice in a way that helps me build discernment, or what we call in yoga the buddhi mind, to tease apart the untruth of the ego mind versus the capital T truth of the inner self. So that's just kind of one little example.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that really it gives us such a clearer understanding of what's going on in this process, and what the relationship is between the Tantra Hatha yogic model and the stages of change model. So in your experience, because you work quite a lot as a yoga therapist, and you work with a lot of folks. So what's your take on why human beings have such a hard time with changing behavior? I mean, ego aside, because we know the ego wants what the ego wants, but because I've met a lot of clients in my work who have, they come and they say, well, I've been through 15 therapists, I've been through 26 programs, and nothing has helped me. And then I say, wow, great. So I'm going to be the 16th therapist who won't be able to help you either. So, what do you think gets in the way? What do you think's going on dynamically, energetically? Why do human beings have such a hard time with change, or have such an aversion to change?
Yeah. I think if I really had the pivotal answer to this, I would probably be a very wealthy, popular speaker. But my sense is that we are likely less fearful of change and more fearful of re-identifying who we are in the world, right? So it's not so much the change itself. I think the change itself might be neither here nor there. It is, I have bound myself to identity X for a certain amount of time. And so if I begin to release my hold on that identity, then who in the world am I? And who does that make me to fill in the blank, right? To my partner, to my children, because they've known me as this person, as the smoker, as the life of the party, as the fat girl, as whatever that role is. And so just in and of myself, I become very tied to that identity. And then my relationships tie me even deeper to that identity. I think that's one aspect of it. I think also another aspect of it is that in yoga, we have this term samskara. Loosely, we can think of samskara as the grooves of our conditioning. And so all of us arrive into this world as babies, at least as far as I know, right? The human experience. And
yeah, we'll just safe to assume that for the context of the discussion.
We'll just all agree to that.
Yeah.
And you know, with not a lot of cognitive or intellectual information that we know of or that we can articulate. And so through the simple act of relationship with our caretakers, or lack thereof in some people's experiences, it begins to set up a certain expectation in life, an expectation for myself and an expectation about my relationships with others. And those expectations create certain belief systems, and those belief systems become ingrained in my body and in my thought processes. And those are the things that drive my actions in the world. And so every time I take an action that solidifies the belief system, that groove gets deeper, right? The samskara gets deeper. And then it becomes like quicksand that we can't get out of. And at the end of the day, I sit here wondering, wow, like I really thought I was going to start exercising and eating healthy today, but I didn't do it. What's wrong with me? Right? And it's this deeply entrenched belief system, which is in and of itself an energetic system that drives kind of how we interact with the world and how we treat ourselves and how we treat others.
Yeah. So it's a much deeper process than I think, a lot of our Western society is aware of. Mm-hmm. We just don't realize like the depth of this injury, so to speak. I mean, we talk about attachment injuries happening, at the moment a person comes into the world as an infant, attachment injuries can begin, and then it continues, like you said, to the groove gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And then before you know it, you're an adult and you, you go to therapy because, your relationships are just failing one after the other. Mm-hmm. And then we have to kind of step back and do the work and figure out where did that belief about yourself start. And I think it's even down to the way the nervous system takes in information, and that's a very almost unconscious process at work. So it's a deep process. So what kinds of clients do you usually see? What are some of the common conditions that you treat in your work as a yoga therapist?
It comes in waves and flows, and it's interesting as I kind of look over the spectrum of my practice over the years. I go through waves of working with people with a lot of physical pathologies and dysfunction, and then I have clusters of and times of working with a lot of stress and anxiety, chronic pain conditions. I work with several clients that have various neurological and muscle conditions. I have people that I work with who have Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's. So really, it's all over the board when it comes to the reasons that people seek yoga therapy. What I also find is looking over the spectrum and the variety is that people often, when they come to yoga therapy, find that integrating the body, mind, for lack of another word, soul or spirit aspect of their experience creates either a quicker path to improved well-being or a stronger pathway to well-being. And what I mean by stronger is that their sense of well-being or equanimity lasts longer at a stretch. Right. So their sense of well-being might have been 5 minutes a day, but through the course of yoga therapy, now they feel rather at peace 5 hours a day, or they more quickly rebound from an anxious state to a more fluid state.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, in my own life, and in my own process of healing and changing, I've noticed that the deeper I get into the practice, which is why I was so drawn to this, the depth practice of Tantra Hatha yoga, and the farther down the rabbit hole I go, the healthier I become, both in my body and my mind, and I definitely resonate with your experience. I was also a self-changer. I was one day, just in the depths of depression, and walked into a yoga studio, and it kind of, and the path has not been linear, nothing in
Right.
life is, but and it's definitely, I always remember that day is the day that put me on the path to better health and well-being. So, can you please tell our listeners where we can find you? If people wanted to work with you, or they wanted to find out more about the work that you do here in Atlanta, I would love for you to share that.
Yes, I see clients privately in Atlanta, Decatur area. I actually also have several clients that I see over Skype or some kind of video platform because they don't live in Georgia. So I do see clients, U.S. wide. I've seen clients from other countries. And, thanks to technology, we can do those kinds of things these days. I co-founded a school with two partners of mine and friends of mine, Marlisa Sullivan and Holly Black, called the Center for Integrative Yoga Studies. And we are based in Atlanta and have teacher training programs in Atlanta and also in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Philly, where we teach some of our programs. And then I do international retreats and local workshops that are found on our website, which is integrativeyogastudies.com.
So I will be sure to include that link in the show notes. I am also a proud graduate of the Center for Integrative Yoga Studies, and I proudly hang my certificate in my office. So, well, Trey, thank you so much for taking the time today to share with us your knowledge and expertise. And we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Deborah. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. And that is all for today. So again, I'm really so grateful that you guys took the time to listen. And also, if you'd like to be a part of a closed community online, I do have a Facebook group called Ancient Tools for Modern Living, and it's a place to get further resources, ask questions, kind of discuss the topics that were presented on the podcast, and connect with other like-minded individuals. So before you are approved, you will be asked to answer a few questions when you request to join, and that's really just to protect the integrity of our community and to prevent any spammers or anyone who may be peddling any kind of wares to the group. So I've created a free resource guide for stress management through yoga that can be accessed and downloaded at my website, which is www.innerskytherapeutics.com. So you just go to the website, sign up to receive the newsletter, and your free copy should be available as an immediate download. And if you liked what you heard today, please head on over to the iTunes store and leave some love in the form of a review. That's really, really, really helps other people to find the podcast. And I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate hearing from you guys and your thoughts about what you heard. So if there is something you would like to know more about, or maybe there's a topic that you would like to hear about, let me do the research for you. You can connect with me on any of the platforms that were mentioned, or you can email me directly. And I'm about to give you my email address, so make sure you have a pen handy and something to write with, because I'm warning you, this is a mouthful. So it's Tzipora, that's T as in Tom, Z as in zebra. So it's TZIPPORAH. My kids always get a kick out of the PP as well. Again, that's TZIPPORAH at Inner Sky, INNERSKY Therapeutics, THERAPEUTICS.com. Probably one of the longest email addresses you've ever seen. So I'm pretty good about responding quickly. So please feel free to email me, ask me questions, let me know what kinds of topics you'd be interested in, and if there's anything else you'd like to know more about regarding mental health and yoga, I am happy to be a resource for you. So just like always, the links to everything mentioned will be in the show notes. Until next time, remember, everything you need is already inside of you. Bye, guys.